Enter into a realm of fright, blacker than the darkest night. Your sanity hangs by a thread. Welcome to the House of Dread.
Have you ever known someone who was a compulsive liar? Someone who weaves intricate tales, constantly seeking attention and sympathy. This is a peculiar kind of individual, one who thrives on deception and manipulation. But what happens when the web of lies they spin becomes their own undoing? Do we maintain a relationship with them, hoping they'll change their ways? Or do we distance ourselves for the fear that their deception will only drag us into the depths of hell right along with them? Enter Olivia. Olivia is a woman in her mid-30s. She lives a modest life in a small town and works as a cashier in a local department store. She's attractive, charming, and leaves an impression on everyone she meets. Despite all of this, she finds herself single and childless, living in complete isolation. One could wonder, how did Olivia end up in such a situation? Her heartbreaking story began when she was merely an infant. As the youngest of 7 children, Olivia was often overlooked and ignored by her parents, who were overwhelmed and exhausted with the relentless demands of raising such a large family. This left a huge emotional void in young Olivia, who was constantly starved for attention and affection. As she grew, Olivia quickly learned that she could garner much of the attention she so desperately craved through lies, deceit, and manipulation. In the very beginning, Olivia would tell little innocent white lies that were relatively harmless and only caused minor inconveniences. But the older she got, and the more skilled and adept she became at understanding and appropriating various social dynamics, her lies became increasingly elaborate, manipulative, and downright dangerous. By the time she entered into adulthood, Olivia had developed a nasty and narcissistic personality that was totally self-serving, as she was willing to do whatever it took to get what she wanted. The emotional baggage from Olivia's painful and love-starved childhood left her with severe psychological wounds and a major fear of commitment. As a result, the few relationships Olivia had been involved in over the years were shallow and very unfulfilling. She concluded that she simply wasn't built for romantic relationships, and thus Olivia was a middle-aged woman with no family of her own. But that was the least of her worries. Olivia actually enjoyed playing people against each other and making them believe her lies. This gave her a sense of power and control that, in her mind, was unrivaled by anything else that life could possibly have to offer. And so, she saw no compelling reason to change her deceitful ways. Olivia's favorite way of extracting emotional resources from her friends and family was by faking illness and injury. She had learned as a child that she was far more likely to elicit nurturing and compassionate attitudes from those around her if she pretended to be powerless and unable to do things for herself. Olivia did everything from complaining about severe migraine headaches to hobbling around on a supposedly sprained ankle, and even going as far as having her friends take her to the hospital for a number of so-called emergencies. It was becoming apparent that Olivia's craving for love and attention was developing into a dangerous addiction. And just like with any addiction, the dosages must continually increase in order for the addicted person to experience a high. One evening, Olivia sat alone in her dimly lit living room, absent-mindedly flipping through the channels on the television. The monotonous drone of the news anchors and the mindless chatter from reality shows filled the empty space, but none of it really captured her attention. She sighed, feeling a deep void within herself. As she sat robotically pressing the buttons on her remote control, she stumbled across a heart-wrenching documentary about a woman struggling with a terrible sickness, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, also known as Lou Gehrig's disease, a debilitating illness that affects the sufferer with gradual loss of muscle control and paralysis. Olivia began to sit up straight on her sofa, overtaken by curiosity at what she was watching. The screen showed a frail woman confined to a wheelchair, her once strong body now withered and weak. Olivia's eyes widened as she watched the woman struggle to speak, her voice barely a whisper, her eyes filled with pain. Olivia paid particular attention to the overwhelming love and support the woman seemed to be getting from all of the people around her. Family, friends, and healthcare staff showered the woman with hugs and words of encouragement, reminding her that she was not alone in her battle. They waited on the woman hand and foot, handling everything from her meals to her medications. Although Olivia was immensely touched by the level of care and compassion the woman's loved ones were showing her, she also felt herself becoming envious and wallowing in self-pity for not being able to garner such an extreme level of attention from her own family. Then, out of nowhere, Olivia got one hell of an idea. She sadistically began to imagine what it would be like if she were to fake having Lou Gehrig's disease. Olivia envisioned her family rallying around her, providing for her every need, the same as the woman in the documentary she was watching. The fact was that even though Olivia was enjoying much of the attention she was already receiving, it never quite felt like enough. Olivia was ready to raise the stakes and up the ante, and manipulating her family into believing she had a horrifying illness like Lou Gehrig's disease seemed like the perfect solution. Olivia could see clear as day the sad faces, tears welling up in the eyes of her family and friends as they feared for her life and her safety. She could feel their arms embracing her as they offered their love and support. Olivia was almost salivating as she imagined getting all the attention, compassion, empathy, and sympathy. However, as she watched the documentary unfold, Olivia could feel herself becoming internally conflicted. Guilt was raging within her, tugging at her conscience. She knew faking an illness like Lou Gehrig's disease would be a despicable act, a lie that could have devastating effects on her family and loved ones. But at the same time, it seemed like an opportunity that was simply too good to pass up. Olivia realized that this would cause her to hold a much higher level of importance in her family's lives, one that nothing or no one would ever be able to compete with. At that very moment, Olivia made a life-altering decision that there would be no coming back from. She determined that there were no limits to the depths of evil she was willing to sink to in order to make herself the center of everyone's universe. As she began to retire for the night, Olivia slipped under the covers, gleefully anticipating the initiation of her deceptive plan. She knew that what she was about to do was downright disgusting, but that very fact gave her plan an element of danger and excitement that actually made Olivia feel thrilled and alive. She could barely sleep that night, as her heart was racing like a child waiting for sunrise on Christmas morning. Olivia knew she was venturing into very dangerous territory, and that pulling off such a diabolical feat would take a level of craft and cunning that before now she had never explored. But she was ready for the challenge. The game was on. Driven by a mix of desperation and determination, Olivia delved into extensive research on Lou Gehrig's disease and its symptoms. Her goal was clear: to gather enough information to make her plan appear not just convincing, but irrefutable. With each piece of knowledge she acquired, her heart raced with a potent blend of fear and excitement. As Olivia's understanding of the disease increased, so did her internal conflict. She grappled with the weight of her deceit, the guilt gnawing at her conscience like a relentless predator. Yet, she couldn't deny the thrill that coursed through her veins every time she dropped subtle hints about her deteriorating health to her loved ones. The rush of adrenaline was intoxicating, fueling her desire to press forward. The lengths to which Olivia was willing to go knew no bounds. She went on an extreme diet so she could lose weight and make herself appear weaker. She started meticulously faking muscle twitches and other involuntary bodily movements to appear more sickly, further convincing her family of her illness. Finally, she started gradually reducing her social interactions and involvement in daily activities, citing her deteriorating health as the cause. Olivia then realized it was time to move in for the kill shot. During a big family dinner, Olivia broke the news to everyone that her doctor had diagnosed her with Lou Gehrig's disease. After taking a few moments to explain to her family what Lou Gehrig's disease was, making sure to convey the severity of her potentially fatal condition, the room went absolutely silent. A few of her family members, particularly her mother, began weeping as they struggled to process the horrific news, grappling with the harsh reality that their beloved Olivia may not be with them for much longer. Olivia was quite surprised to find out that her family's reaction to the news was actually more intense than she had imagined. The fear and pain in the eyes of her loved ones was almost more than she could bear, and the gravity of the moment almost broke her, as once again she was struggling with her conflicted emotions. Olivia's poor mother got up from her seat at the dinner table, walked over to Olivia, and hugged her tighter than she ever had before. As tears were streaming down her mother's face, Olivia felt sick to her stomach. Long gone were the days of the little white lies that Olivia had started telling as a young girl. She was now playing with searing hot fire and was afraid that she was going to get burned. But she also realized that making this announcement to her family meant she had officially crossed the line, and she rationalized that if she had come this far, she might as well see her plan through to the end. 1 year later, Olivia had her entire community eating out of the palm of her hand. Her family, friends, and neighbors had all banded together to shower Olivia with love, support, and encouragement. And just like the woman in that documentary she had stumbled across all those months ago, Olivia was now being waited on hand and foot. Every day she enjoyed watching people fuss over her, ensuring she had everything she needed. They cooked Olivia's meals, cleaned her house, and took care of even her smallest needs. Just like she had always wanted, Olivia was now the center of everyone's universe. Every whim and wish Olivia had was instantly gratified, and at least for a while, she couldn't imagine living any other way. Yet, all was not perfect in paradise. Amidst the web of lies she had spun, Olivia couldn't escape the nagging voice in the back of her mind. Doubt crept in like an unwelcome guest at an otherwise perfect party. What if someone saw through her act? What if they discovered the truth? The anxiety that gripped Olivia's heart tightened its hold with each passing day. Because of this, Olivia was very careful to maintain the illusion of her illness. She refused to have anyone live with her, knowing that the close proximity would make it harder to hide her deceit. Whenever someone suggested moving in to take care of her, she would come up with reasonable excuses to prevent it from happening. She would say that she valued her privacy, explaining that having someone around all the time would make her feel suffocated, thus amplifying her stress and worsening her symptoms. Olivia insisted that she needed the space to rest and recover on her own terms, convincing everyone that it was for her own well-being. However, as her social interactions dwindled and her involvement in daily activities waned, Olivia began to feel a bittersweet mix of triumph and trepidation. The walls were closing in, and she knew there was no turning back. The thrill of successfully manipulating those around her was tempered by the realization that she had now become a prisoner of her own deception. Trapped within the walls of her home, unable to leave for the fear of people seeing her moving about freely, Olivia began feeling like a caged animal. And as her quality of life continued to diminish, she realized that the game just wasn't fun anymore. Olivia felt a strong and sickening sense of irony wash over her as she realized that just as she was beginning to get everything she'd ever wanted, a part of her was starting to long for a way out. The unrelenting fear and anxiety she had about being found out, combined with the stress and exhaustion of constantly having to put on such an elaborate act, was proving to be too much for Olivia's delicate mental state, and she was now on the verge of having a psychotic break. So, in an effort to distract herself from the immense pressure she was under, Olivia figured she needed some sort of activity to keep her busy. She decided to do a little housework. She saw that her floors could use a little TLC, so she grabbed a bucket, a scrub brush, and a pair of cleaning gloves. As Olivia scrubbed the kitchen floor on her hands and knees, she was lost in her own thoughts. The repetitive motion and sound of the scrub brush against the floor provided a temporary escape from the overwhelming pressure she felt. She was so engrossed in her task that she didn't hear the front door open. Startled, Olivia looked up to see her sister, Emma, standing in the doorway, her eyes wide with shock. Emma's mouth hung open, unable to form words as she took in the scene before her. Olivia, who had been pretending to use a walker and a wheelchair for months, was now on her hands and knees, vigorously scrubbing the floors, like nothing was wrong. Olivia wasn't even struggling. Her body was moving fluidly, and she wasn't shaking or experiencing any of the muscle twitches or tremors that she had claimed to battle with daily. Emma could immediately tell that something was off. A mix of emotions washed over Emma's face: confusion, disbelief, and genuine concern. She took a hesitant step forward, not quite sure if what she was seeing was real. Olivia felt a lump forming in her throat, her heart pounding in her chest. She had forgotten that since announcing her illness to the family, she had given them a key to her front door, enabling them to enter her home in case of an emergency, or to simply do a welfare check. It was another measure Olivia had taken to validate her story, but now it proved to be her biggest mistake. This was the moment she had feared, the moment when her carefully constructed facade would crumble. Olivia's sister Emma, who was in shock, quickly began to feel a mix of anger and betrayal. Her hands trembled as she pointed accusingly at Olivia, her face filled with a mixture of disbelief and hurt. Olivia could see the storm of emotions raging within her sister Emma, as she knew that her secret was now exposed. Tears welled up in Olivia's eyes as she tried to find the words to explain herself, but the truth had already been laid bare. The weight of her deception pressed upon her, suffocating her with a crushing guilt. The shock and intensity of the situation engulfed both of the sisters, leaving them standing in a silence that spoke volumes. Surprisingly, Emma never spoke a single word. Instead, her face turned cold, and she merely turned around and walked out of the house, leaving the front door wide open. At that moment, Olivia realized the extent of the damage she had caused. Her longing for attention had led her down a treacherous path, one that had burned a bridge of trust that would most likely never be repaired. Later that day, Olivia tried to call her mother to explain the situation and apologize, but there was no answer. She then tried calling a few of her other relatives, but got the same result. Olivia made phone call after phone call and left countless voicemails that never got returned. Olivia knew exactly what this meant. She knew that by now her sister had spread the news and that her family had most likely decided to distance themselves from her. Olivia could not believe the turn of events. She had cooked up an elaborate scheme to fake illness in an attempt to bring her loved ones closer to her, but ultimately, she just ended up driving everyone away. Little did Olivia know, however, that she was only just beginning to experience the consequences of her actions. Turns out that not only had Olivia turned her own family and friends against her, but the entire town as well. Everywhere she went, she received menacing looks and scowls from neighbors, colleagues, and acquaintances. No one would even speak to her. Whenever she said hello or good morning to someone, her greetings merely went unreciprocated. Olivia's entire community had shunned her and was now treating her like a social pariah. All her life, Olivia had felt isolated and alone, but this treatment was next level. She wasn't used to this, and it hurt like hell. Olivia tried convincing herself that everyone was just being ridiculous. She rationalized that if her parents had just made her feel more loved and appreciated as a child, she never would have needed to go to such extremes just to feel loved and wanted. But deep down, Olivia knew that all of that was bullshit. She knew she could have used better judgment and sought healthier ways to fill the hole in her heart. She also knew that a part of her actually enjoyed manipulating people. After all, it made her feel powerful. Ultimately, Olivia had to admit she had brought all of this on herself, and she deserved every ounce of pain that she was in. Olivia realized that at this point the only thing she could do was try her best to go on with her life, and that someday soon she'd be able to make amends with everyone. The days and weeks rolled along as Olivia mustered the strength to move forward and carry on with her life. For a while, things were moving along as best as they could until Olivia found herself facing some profound and unexpected challenges. Simple daily tasks that once seemed effortless now became arduous battles. The once firm grip she possessed began to weaken, making it increasingly difficult for her to grab objects. She couldn't even open a jar of mayonnaise to fix herself a sandwich. Then, without rhyme or reason, she suddenly became clumsy, tripping and stumbling through her house without even encountering any obstacles. One day, she tried going for a walk to clear her mind, but as soon as she stepped outside, she found herself barely able to walk. Each step felt like an uphill battle, as if her legs were being weighed down by invisible shackles. The strength in her legs seemed to have just evaporated, leaving her feeling vulnerable and uncertain. Frustration and confusion coursed through her veins as more and more she struggled to perform tasks that were once second nature. Then, scariest of all, Olivia's breath became shallow, as if an invisible force was constricting her lungs. The simple act of inhaling and exhaling became a struggle, leaving her gasping for air. It seemed as if there was a weight on her chest that grew bigger and heavier with each passing day. Fear and anxiety clouded Olivia's mind as she tried to make sense of her deteriorating condition. What the hell could be wrong with her? Why was her body betraying her in such a cruel manner? These questions echoed relentlessly in her thoughts, leaving her with a sense of helplessness and frustration. Olivia sought answers, consulting with doctors and specialists in search of a diagnosis. But the answers eluded her, leaving her trapped in a web of uncertainty. Each test and examination only deepened her confusion, as the results kept coming back inconclusive. The frustration mounted as she longed for a clear explanation, a concrete reason for her physical decline. In a last-ditch effort before giving up entirely, Olivia consulted with one last specialist and received news that almost gave her a stroke. After running a series of tests, the doctor looked at Olivia square in her eyes, and with a look of both sadness and concern, he told her that she had amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, aka Lou Gehrig's disease. Olivia could not believe what she was hearing. She immediately pushed back against the doctor's diagnosis and demanded that he run his tests again. However, the doctor assured Olivia that the tests were indeed accurate, and that there was nothing he could do to change her diagnosis. Olivia's world came crashing down as the doctor's words echoed in her ears. She felt an overwhelming surge of shock, sadness, anger, and grief engulfing her all at once. Just a few weeks ago, Olivia had been playing the role of someone with Lou Gehrig's disease. Now her sick and twisted fantasy had somehow manifested into reality. Olivia almost collapsed to the floor, overwhelmed with regret as the weight of the deceitful game she had played on her family suddenly paled in comparison to the gravity of her very real diagnosis. With tears streaming down her face, Olivia stormed out of the doctor's office, her emotions threatening to consume her. Her mind was a whirlwind of disbelief and despair. Each step felt heavy as if she were carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. The reality of her situation hit her like a tidal wave, and there was nothing she could do about it. As she stumbled towards her car, Olivia's vision blurred with tears. She fumbled for her keys, her hands trembling uncontrollably. It took several attempts before she managed to unlock the door. With great difficulty, she managed to slide into the driver's seat, her body now trembling from a sudden onset of very real muscle twitches and tremors. As she drove home, the traffic was almost a blur. Olivia's thoughts were consumed by the devastating news she had just received. Her mind was a chaotic mess of emotions, making it nearly impossible to focus on the road. Tears continued streaming down her face, blurring her vision and clouding her judgment. The traffic lights all seemed to be changing too quickly, constantly catching Olivia off guard. Her reflexes were dulled by her overwhelming emotional state, causing her to slam on the brakes abruptly or accelerate too quickly. The honking horns and screeching tires served as a constant reminder of her fragile state of mind. Several near misses with other vehicles kept jolting Olivia back to reality, snapping her out of her emotional haze, if only momentarily. She gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles turning white as she desperately tried to regain control of herself and focus on the task at hand. With each passing mile, Olivia's emotions continued to overwhelm her. The weight of her diagnosis felt suffocating, as if it were physically crushing her chest. The road she was driving on seemed endless, mirroring the uncertainty that now loomed over her future. Olivia wondered how she was going to survive now that she was really dealing with a life-threatening situation. It had been weeks since she had last heard from anyone in her family. Of course, they still weren't speaking to her, and she knew that getting help from them now would be extremely difficult, if not impossible. Finally, the chickens had come home to roost. The consequences of Olivia's deceitful actions had finally caught up with her. Years and years of lies, manipulation, and falsehood had compounded the interest on Olivia's debt, and the bill had come due. Olivia's hands were trembling as she reached for her cell phone. Again, she tried calling her mother, who still wasn't answering. Olivia began leaving a voicemail, sincerely apologizing to the entire family for lying and deceiving them. She told her mother that she loved her and understood why she wasn't answering the phone. But if there was any chance at all that she could make amends with the family, she would love to be given that opportunity. A deafening crash reverberated through the air. Broken glass and twisted metal scattered the road like morbid confetti. Nearby witnesses erupted into a cacophony of yelling and screaming. A few people rushed in to try and help, but it was too late. In the midst of Olivia's distressed emotional state, she didn't realize that she had run a stop sign and drove directly into a busy intersection where she got smashed by a 30,000-pound dump truck. Olivia died on impact. Frantic calls to the police filled the air, mingling with anguished cries for help. Olivia's lifeless body remained trapped within the wreckage. She was only 2 blocks away from her house when the accident occurred. In the wake of the tragedy, Olivia's family would come together to mourn their sudden loss. Her mother, particularly haunted by the heartfelt voicemail Olivia left on her phone mere seconds before her death, would replay the message over and over again, trying to hold on to the sound of her daughter's voice for as long as possible. In the end, all Olivia ever wanted was to feel loved and validated, though her means of achieving this goal were often destructive and harmful. Over the course of her life, she lied, cheated, and manipulated, ultimately betraying the trust of the very people who loved her the most. Always remember that true love and validation cannot be forged through lies and trickery. Only through honesty, authenticity, and genuine connection. Also, be very careful of the bridges you burn. You may have to cross those same paths again.
If you enjoyed this presentation, please consider showing your support by liking this video and subscribing to the channel. And if you're in need of a narrator for your next project, or you just want to say hello, contact me at thehouseofdread666@gmail.com. Until the next tale of terror, this is Victor Bloodborne. Stay dreadful.